Knowledge is power. Make an impact by learning more. Call us right now for more help at 866-945-8070. Facebook, and then we'll spend the whole hour talking about Amy McDonald now. Okay, hacking data in Excel, part 2. Part due, share to my page, go live. I think it's finally remembering that I always go live on Nerd Enterprises Inc.'s page. Preparing to stream the live webinar. What I've learned is that it's actually already recording even at this point, because last week I noticed the part where I was giving you the play-by-play, it came out on the actual final record. Here we are, and we're live. So it's a little deceiving. Deceiving. All right, let me just post it in the Facebook group, and we are live. Hacking data in Microsoft Excel, part 2. And post. Okay, good morning. Happy Friday. It's October 20th, 2017. We are live with Hacking Data in Microsoft Excel, part 2. Today's episode, and every episode, of course, is sponsored by none other than Nerd Enterprises Incorporated. Funny name, serious business. And Bilby's. Bilby's has been a great partner and friend to me this year. We were just talking about them yesterday in our 97 and up call, and how they go beyond just giving us a place to store receipts, but they give us a ton of intelligence on our expenses and revenues too, but there's a heavy emphasis focusing on expenses, looking at really understanding the trends, where the main differences are, what things have increased more so than others, getting alerts about things that are important, and having a platform that makes it, one of the things I was able to do this week that I noticed that it can be done in QuickBooks, but it takes much longer, is to get a report that's really in a flat file format. To do the things we're going to be talking about today, like pivot tables, you really need a flat file. That's what we saw last week. And in QuickBooks, when you dump these reports, if you want to look at like expenses by vendor, you have to do a lot of cleaning up of the export before you can get it into a flat file, because usually it'll have the vendor name on one line, and then it'll have the transactions in a series of lines, and then it'll have the subtotal for that vendor. And so you have to copy the name down to each line in between, get rid of the header, get rid of the subtotal, and do that for every single vendor in the report to get it into a flat file. So I looked at something in Bilby's this week where pretty much in 2 clicks, I can get it exported and it's in a flat file immediately. So Bilby's is something I strongly have been encouraging people to look at, not just because they're a friend and a partner, but because I actually really love the software. And
Are you talking about exporting from QuickBooks to Bilby's?
No. All right, so you really jumbled together the concepts on that one. So I'm talking about a comparison of when I export an expenses by vendor report from QuickBooks versus exporting an expenses by vendor report directly from Bilby's. Bilby's will connect with QuickBooks Online, and the data is synced. But what I'm talking about is in Bilby's, if I do that export, it's done. I create a report and filter it based on all the expenses for this year, or a particular vendor, or whatever I want to do. Then select all export, and it's all there. And it's
how about if you were to export can you export it as a CSV file from QuickBooks?
Again, when you export from QuickBooks to Excel or CSV, which is the same thing, it comes out not in a flat file format. It comes out organized by vendor with the transactions in between. So hold on, we have people trying to get in here to the live call. Lots of people coming in at the last minute. You're all in trouble. Just kidding. Gina, you're muted, by the way. It looks like you're
we want to come in. We're never in trouble if we want to come join. Don't be mean or I'm going to get off.
You're all late.
No, Miss Mariette is the Intuit Pro Advisor Profile of the Month.
Oh, it's so funny. I love seeing that picture. I'm like, that was like 2 babies ago. I have another baby now. We need to update the picture, please.
Just put pictures up of all the babies.
I do. Trust me.
No, I mean
They
for your
won't have any
ProAdvisor
issues.
profile.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, they have all my updated pictures. I've asked them so many times. So I'm like, you guys, okay, you obviously like the red coat. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's like a power trip, but okay, keep me in the red coat.
Wasn't
Anyway.
that when you did your 17 hats? Didn't you do those pictures there?
No, those pictures were actually really random. When I was, I'm telling you, when I was firm in the future in 2015, 2 years ago, they did this whole headshot thing with me where they took like hundreds of pictures and videos, and so they keep on using the same thing. And I'm like, I'm not firm in the future anymore, and I've had another baby, so get another picture of me.
It is the future. That's what it is. You are living the future.
Yeah, I know. I just mess with them because it's funny. I don't know why they like that. But I can't wait to share with you guys what happened a few weeks ago. I can't say it yet, but oh my God, I'm dying to share. But I can't yet.
Can you give us a hint?
Well, if you saw my profile picture a week ago, I think it was a really big hit. So I can only, that's it. The picture, I don't know if you saw my profile picture with all the cameras in front of me.
I saw that.
Yeah, so that's as big as a hint as I can get, but I'll share with you guys soon. But
It was clear you were filming something, but it wasn't clear what or what for.
Yeah, well, I was getting filmed for something, so
Oh.
I wasn't. Yeah, so but I'll share soon. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun these last few weeks.
Right. I got the impression this had something to do with your Latina business community.
Latina business and some big partners of mine that are finally joining the forces and getting empowered and supporting the mission to support Latino-owned businesses. So exciting stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. Looking forward to learning more when you can share more.
Yes.
All right. So we're talking about hacking data in Excel, and that's what I was starting to talk about, and just kind of using the example of how, with Bilbies, you can get an export that's immediately ready in a flat file. There's no cleanup work needing to be done. And that is incredibly helpful because no kidding, it can take, especially if you have a file with a lot of data in it, it can take a good hour to clean up a big export file, especially when, like I said, you're faced with having to copy vendor names down for each section for that vendor's transactions. That in itself can take a really long time. And, it's interesting because there are several products that I've seen over the years where I think that what they're trying to do is put care into creating an export format that probably from their point of view looks really pretty. The reality is for most of us as accountants, we don't need pretty, we need flat, right? I need a flat linear file so I can run pivot tables, so I can do data and filters and all the stuff that we were kind of looking at last week that we're going to continue looking at this week. So nonetheless, even if for that reason alone, it would almost be worth getting Bilbies to just so you could, because again, it'll pull everything from QBO. And then once it's all in Bilbies, not to mention if you do get in the habit, as you should, of forwarding all your receipts and bills into Bilbies, then the attachments are there. And when you do an export, like what I'm describing, there's a column that's got a click to view link in the Excel file. So I can actually view the PDF of the receipt online. So I've done a few Bilbies demos before. We'll do some more in the near future so you can see specifically what I'm talking about. I don't want to get too far off topic today, but I just wanted to mention that, Bilbies is a good example of a product where you can easily extract data and get it into the format like what we're seeing here, last week and this week. So with that, let me bring up the file. I have it exactly the way we left it last week. And by the way, if you go into last week's episode, you can download the finished template in the state that it was in as of the end of last week's webinar. And I also gave you the original raw template before I did anything to it in case you wanted to. Well, here would be the ideal scenario. If you really want to learn the stuff that I was showing you last week, download the raw template, watch the video, watch a little bit of what I did, pause it, go practice what I did, try it, make sure you understand how to do it, pause, replay, so you can, by the time you're done watching it, might take a couple of hours, but you'll learn a ton. And at the end of it, you should be able to get the raw template looking like the finished template. Right? Just go through it a piece at a time. This is not the sort of content that you're meant to absorb by just sitting there and watching in a passive kind of way. It's more of an active, engaged, watch, practice, and learn kind of thing. So just be aware of that. And we're going to open up the template from last week. And here it is, exactly the way we left off. And before I dive in too deep, let me just see if anybody else is trying to get in.
Hey, Seth, I have a quick question while you're looking for people to get in. Have
Already?
you ever done, yes, I always have questions. Have you ever done a Google Sheet versus Microsoft Excel?
I heard, have you ever done a Google Sheet versus... You mean Google Sheet versus Excel?
Yes, is what she's, Microsoft Excel.
Yes, in fact, I have a blog post called Google Sheets versus Excel on my website, nerdenterprises.com. I believe it's there. It was on SethDavid.com, and we moved all that content over to Nerd Enterprises when the time came. So you should be able to find it there. And I've done almost anything I've done on Google Sheets, I've made it a point to point out, like, hey, this is stuff you might have thought you can only do in Excel, but you can do it in Google Sheets too. Mariette, did we lose you? Now she's muted.
I have a question. In which case would you use Excel versus Google Sheets?
None. I just use Google Sheets now.
All the time?
I'm kidding. No, for the most part, I do. Honestly, like when I get an email from somebody with Excel as an attachment, especially because I'm using G Suite, so I'm using the Gmail email client, it makes it really easy. When I click on the attachment, it gives me a preview, and then I have an open with option, and I can just immediately open it in Google Sheets. And that's typically what I will do. And in fact, what I wanted to do next week after today is I'm going to take this sheet and convert it into Google Sheets. And we're going to look at how to do some of the same stuff in Google Sheets, right? Because there's some things that, the only thing I can think of that we've done here that I don't believe is available in Google Sheets, and I'm going to test it to be 1,000% sure, is the data text to columns command, where we're able to split the column up, you know, like to get rid of the Z or to get rid of the dash. If you remember from last week when we went over that stuff, I don't believe that command is available in Google Sheets.
I think you can get an add-in for that, as I recall. If you go to
I don't want to do add-ins necessarily. I want to know what Google Sheets as a raw, you know.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
which is fine. If there's an add-in for it, great. But, you know, over time, I find that when we start adding add-ins, it has a way of kind of slowing things down. It's sort of like the equivalent of adding plugins in a WordPress website. You know, these are extra things that add bloat to what you're doing. So I like to avoid doing those things if I can. But and there are a ton of add-ins that you can add on to your Google apps. You know, when you're in that world, like I said, I try to only add things like that when I absolutely need them, right? But again, we'll test it out next week, and we'll see if there is something comparable to a text to columns in Google Sheets. I'll do the research. They actually have really good documentation too. You know, if you go into their help files, there's a whole help file with all the functions that Google Sheets has. That's how I started to realize and learn that Google Sheets, in terms of formulas, has everything Excel does. You know, and then when I saw that Google Sheets could do pivot tables, they don't quite look as pretty as Excel's pivot tables, but they work exactly the same way, and they work just as well. So, any other questions before we get into it? No. Mariette, you want to come back on? Unmute? No.
I'm driving, but when I park, I'll come back on because it sounds ugly when I'm driving. Okay.
Okay. Bye. Bye. All right. So we finished off last time with this pivot table report, and for those was everybody who's here today here last week? I'm sort of making that assumption that you're either here or caught the replay. Okay. So, excuse me. We finished off. We had the data set of sales information, right? And I finished off with this pivot table that looked at where we have, you know, the product type of beverages and then the different products. And we broke out our sales by year and then within that by month, right? So what I'm going to do, because we did that right at the very end, is I'm going to delete this pivot table and we're going to create it all over again. Because we did that at the tail end, and I want to kind of go through it again and go through it nice and slow and make sure that it's really clear. So at this point, I'm back to my raw data table, my sales data 1 table. And I've got my cell pointer here in the range. Doesn't really matter where, anywhere in the range, Excel is going to figure out, you know, where I'm at and what I'm trying to do. So we go over to our Insert tab, and we go all the way to the left here where it says Pivot Table, right? We're going to insert a pivot table. And it immediately figures out the range because the shape of it is, you know, pretty straightforward. If you just want to be 1,000% sure, select the whole range before you go to insert the pivot table. And then there's nothing else to do here, but the defaults are all going to work just fine, right? I want it in a new worksheet. I'll click OK. And now here I am with a blank canvas, right? This is a report. This is like going into QuickBooks Desktop and saying, I want to create a transaction summary or a transaction detail report. In fact, there's a nice difference. If you're familiar with QuickBooks Desktop specifically and how the reporting works, where you can create a transaction detail or a transaction summary report, then you know kind of the difference between the two, and the fact that in QuickBooks, you can either get summary level data or detail level data, but not both in one report. Right? Summary level data tends to deal with the sources. Detail level data tends to deal with the targets. You know, so I can't. It's hard to get both. For example, if I want to run let's say I want to run an open balance report, you know, which shows my customers and how much they all owe me. There's no option to get their contact information into that report because it's a detail level report. It's showing individual transactions, and their contact data lives at the level of, you know, at really a summary level, at the level of the customer, not at the level of the transaction. So that's why in QuickBooks Desktop or even QuickBooks Online, it's not easy to get those two kinds of data into the same report. In fact, it's not possible. So what I would do in the past with Desktop is I would export the transaction detail report into Excel. I would also then export a customer list report that has all the customer contact info into another Excel sheet, and then I'd write a VLOOKUP to bring the contact information alongside, let's say, that open invoices report. So I have everything alongside one another so that it makes it easy to follow up on collections, you know, that kind of thing. So it's, I'm sorry, I'm just going to turn off the enter exit chime. So having the ability to combine that data in a single report is one of the things, one of the powerful things that a pivot table, when you have a nice flat file like this, you know, it enables you to do that, right? Because I could, in this data table, if I had these customers' contact information in here, it's here, it would be available. I could easily drop it into my report. So this is why when it comes to reporting, I don't care what product you're talking about, even all the ones that exist today, none of them are going to give me the kind of power that this does. You know, so my goal almost all of the time is I want to get the data into a flat file, which is what this is, right? Where it's just straight up columns and rows and data, right? I don't want any fancy formatting in my reports. There's other products I've looked at that make it infinitely harder even than QuickBooks does to get the data into this kind of format. Because like I said, they're trying to make it look pretty, and I don't need them to make it look pretty. I need them to give me a flat file. So I don't need pretty, I need utility is what it comes down to. So when we first set up the pivot table, I've got my blank canvas, right? And if you go back to the data table, remember that you have all of your columns here. Each of these columns is a field, right? A field is a house for some piece of data that has to do with the transaction. So each transaction has a piece of data that goes into each field. And so what I'm explaining to you is very basic database level, you know, nomenclature, because I want you to really understand clearly how this comes together in the pivot table. So what the pivot table is going to allow me to do is take any field in the database and organize it however I want to. And however I want to, meaning I have columns. Notice on the bottom right here of my screen, I have columns and rows and values, and then I have filters, right? Everybody see where I'm pointing to? I'm kind of purposely going real slow around this stuff so that you can all see. I'm going to use my highlights. So bottom right of my screen, you see my red little thing? I have my columns, my rows, my values, and then I've got my filters. So then in the top, I have all of those fields. I have every column that exists in that data table. And I guess as long as I have that arrow on, it won't let me actually click on anything. So here in the top of this right-hand section is every single column from my data table. So Excel is basically waiting for me to tell it what I want and where I want it, right? Completely blank canvas. I can put any of these fields in the rows, any of these fields in the columns. So now it's up to me to decide how I want to organize the data in a way that it makes sense. Let's do something real quick, because here we have first name and last name, right? And that gets clunky to me. Let's say I want the full customer name in a single field. So this is something we went over last time. I want to combine this into full name. So I want to use my concatenate formula. We talked about this at the beginning of last week. And I want to concatenate the first name, comma, and I'll explain what I did here. So looking up here in the formula bar, because it's easier to see what I did there, I pointed to F2 because I want the first name first. Comma tells it that's the first piece of information. Now I'm going to give you the next one. And I put quote, space, quote, which is just a way of saying put a space in there, right? Quotes mean I want you to put very literally whatever goes inside the quotes into the next piece of it, right? And then I put another comma saying, okay, I'm done with that part, and then I want last name. So this will give me a perfectly formatted first name, space, last name, result. And when I hit enter, and I widen that column, you can see that real clear. So I'm just going to copy and paste that down for all the data. So now I've got a field for just full name, which is going to, again, make it easy to report. I could have, in the pivot table, put first name, then last name, but then I'd have to make all kinds of tweaks to get it so that it's not subtotaling within the last name by first name or anything. So this just makes it really easy to do what I'm going to do next in the pivot table. Now, because I'd already established this pivot table based on that data set, and now I've added something in, notice there's no full name field available here yet. So what I want to do is go into the Analyze part. Notice I'm in the Pivot Table Tools. And that appears here, by the way, because I've clicked somewhere here in the Pivot Table region in the report. If I click away, it's gone. So you have to click into this Pivot Table region that's here on the left, and then the Pivot Table Tools tabs will appear. And over here, under Analyze, I'm going to click Refresh. Keep your eyes here, right, where the last name and first name is. And when I click refresh, you're going to see full name appear there. And there it is. So now what maybe I want to see is I want to see full name in my rows. And there it is. Not a lot of different names here, actually. Just a few customers, I guess, who bought a lot of stuff. And you know, come to think of it, I'm trying to think, are these customers or sales reps? They may actually be sales reps. I forgot this data set is so old. But the next thing right away that I notice is missing, of course, is the values, the amounts, right? So I want to get the order total here into my values. So again, I'm going to click and drag. So this gives me the sales by full name, right? Considering the small list of names, I suspect these are actually sales reps. So these are sales by sales rep. Over here, now that I've put the order total in the field, notice the numbers don't look very pretty, so I want to format them. So again, in this bottom right quadrant, where I see sum of order total, I'm going to click on that, and now I have options here. So I'm going to go to Value Field Settings, and then Number Format. And I just want to quickly get them formatted like a number. And you have your choices. I'm going to use the comma separator, 2 decimal places, and I want negative numbers red and with brackets. Okay, okay. And now I've got numbers that are much more legible, right? So now here's sales by sales rep. But let's say I want to now see them by year and month. This is what we did last week, but last week I did it based on product. So remember, and this is what's beautiful about this, is it's so versatile. So last week we started looking at products by product type and then product within that. Now we're looking at sales by sales rep. So let's take the year and drop it into the columns. Boom, so now I can see sales by sales rep by year and a grand total. Okay, but do you see how quickly the whole thing changes and updates just because I drag the year into the column? So it says, oh great, we're reorganizing this, right? You just can't do this in QuickBooks or any other accounting software that I've ever played with. Now I want the month within the year. I want it really broken out by month. So now I'm going to drag the months, but I want them underneath the year. That's going to tell Excel that I essentially want it subtotaled within each year by month. So click, drag, and I'm still holding my mouse key. And notice the green line. It kind of shows me where I'm going to leave it when I let go of the mouse button. Right? So when I let go of that, having confirmed that it's going to end up below it, then it gives me exactly what I'm looking for. Right? And now I've got sales by sales rep within each year by month. Again, there's no way you could ever get a report like this out of any accounting software that I've ever used. And let's say I made a mistake and put the month on top, right? So we get this weird looking report that doesn't really tell us anything, right? Well, it kind of does. I guess if we wanted to see a comparative, right? This actually gives us a comparative because it's showing me for each month and then within that each year what the sales were, right? So I can kind of see how Andrew Fuller did 2005 versus 2006. So I was going to say it's useless data, but not necessarily. It might actually be really useful to see that, especially if I want to see the trends and how's this sales rep doing, year over year, and also being able to analyze it in terms of the trends by month, especially if I know that business tends to cycle certain ways, certain months of the year.
Hey, Seth,
So, yes, sir.
could you do, say, for example, all this detail, can you do conditional formatting if you want to see, if it's a greater than such and such amount, make it green. If it's less than such amount, make it red or whatever?
Possibly. Hold that thought. I'll come back to that in a minute. So the point I wanted to make sure was clear, though, is when I've dropped, let's say I drop month above the year and I realize that's not what I meant to do, it's real easy while I'm down here in this quadrant to click on the months and drag it below the year. And again, I get it into my correct format, right? Year and then by month. So it's really, really easy to update this stuff based on anything I want. Now, let's say I decide, you know what, that's interesting, but now within each sales rep, I want to see what products they sold, right? So I want to see sales by sales rep, and within that, I want to see the sales by product. So I'm just going to drag product below full name. And by the way, you can resize this, this region here so it's easier to see the different quadrants. I'm going to move that back down, though. So I want to bring the product name I'm forgetting what the field is that I actually want for the product name. Oh, it's just called product. That's what I want to see. And so, by the way, this is where it's handy sometimes to go back to the raw data to see where is that field or what is it exactly called, right? So I need a field that's just called product, which is here. So we're going to click and drag this down below where it says full name. And that's going to let me see which products each sales rep sold. Boom. So here's Andrew Fuller. And here's what he sold. Now there's a lot of different products, right? So this starts to become a very large report. Now I can split the screen up. I can go to my View tab and freeze panes so that I can see my headers at all times. But I might look at that and say, you know what, this is a little clunky to look at. Let's get rid of the product, which I can do by either clicking and dragging product back up to the pivot table fields, or notice here under the pivot table fields, it's checked off. So I can just uncheck it, and that'll get rid of it. It just takes it out, no matter where it is. And so let's say instead of the product, I want to see it by product category. That might be easier to look at. So we're going to look at category name and drag it under full name. And that's a little easier to read. Right now I can see here's what Andrew Fuller sold in terms of beverages, condiments, confections, and so on. Right? So now let's test Dennis's theory and see if we can do conditional formatting. I imagine my only concern in doing something like that, Dennis, is I'm going to need to select the range that I want to apply the conditional formatting to. And when I change the report format, the shape of it changes, which means it may crash once I make a change. But you can certainly select this whole range, for example, and I wouldn't necessarily want to do totals. First of all, let's look at design and see if we have like a pivot, something built into the pivot table. So here, by the way, is where you could add calculated fields. I'm just trying to see logically where they might put something in here that would let me, build the conditional formatting into the table itself. I would expect something like that would be in design. And by the way, here's some standard designs you can apply to the pivot table. Right? Notice in the background as I move my mouse over, it changes based on, it kind of gives me a preview. Right? So some of these other preset formats, will just make it look prettier. down here, if I scroll down further, I've got even more options for how I might want it to look. So let's just pick something like this. Now what I could do is, again, while that range is selected, I could apply conditional formatting to that range, right? And I could say new rule. Actually, let's go back to the standards. Right, so let's say I want to see anything that's greater than 10,000. You could already see in the background, but I don't think that gave us a lot of results. It did give us a few. And then here we'll choose what that looks like. So what that just did was it highlighted any cells where there was more than 10,000. Right, and doing something like that, I might want to exclude the totals column. So I might want to apply that conditional formatting only to the data that's in between, right? But again, as soon as I change the formatting of this report, you know, to the extent that the shape of it changes, if the size of the range, for example, if I go back to include the actual products instead of the category name, it's going to crash. And actually, I believe that crashed all the conditional formatting altogether, because now I have amounts that are more than 10,000 that aren't lighting up. So you can do it, but be careful with it. You know, you might not want to do something like that until you know you've got the report sort of finalized. And keep in mind that you might want to do, you know, 3 different reports based on the same data set. So I can do an infinite number of pivot tables based on this data. So if I get this report in here and I see, let's put the category name back in, right? And I know this is something I want to leave. I can double click the tab, call this sales by rep and category, right? And then I can go back in here and insert a whole new pivot table in a whole new sheet, right? So I can now create a whole new, completely different report. You know, so that's how you kind of save it. And I can, you know, I can save this and send it to somebody. But be careful saving this out into a new tab. If you do that, it's going to create external links to this file, because remember, the source data is here. And if you send that to somebody and they, you know, in its own file, and they open it up, they're going to get a prompt that tells them there are external links. And if they choose the option to update those links, it's going to crash the whole thing. Can you do like a copy special, like just values? You know, yeah, you can do that, but then it's not dynamic, right? Then they can't really analyze it. So, and that I was about to say, it makes a strong case, in my opinion, for doing stuff like this in Google Sheets, because now I don't have to worry about sending them a piece of it. I can just share it with them, right? So, you know, again, it makes it much easier on collaboration when you do this stuff in Google Sheets. So again, I can go back in here, and now sheet 2 is really a new report, right? And let's see what else we can play with here. Let's say I want the category names in my columns, right? And again, we want order totals in our values. And this time I'll go through it quickly. We'll just format that. Click OK, Control Home. So we have the category names and the sales, and then the question is, what do I want my rows, right? How do I want to see these? Because now I've got the categories across the columns. And maybe it would be useful, again, to see the full name in the rows. So that gives me, again, another perspective on it. It's a different way of looking at it, because now I can see each rep and what they sold within each category. Right? So again, doing this stuff, it just makes it so easy. The key was getting a flat file data set prepared so I could easily see what was going on here. So now this would be, where did it go? This would be sales by rep and category. let's try this. Let's duplicate this. So we'll say mover copy, create a copy. That's another maybe kind of faster way, so I can just quickly get a new report out of it and start making more changes. So this is how you can kind of set up these reports and then incrementally change and add new ones, right? Now let's say I want to get kind of a price list, right? So let's get all this out of here. So all I have is my total. So on the rows I want the product, and here I don't want the sum of the order totals. Let's remove that. I want the unit purchase price. And we'll leave it as a sum. In theory, it should all be. That might be adding it up for the quantity that was sold. So let's put the quantity in there as well. So I have sum of quantity, sum of unit purchase price. Now we're going to get real advanced. I want to do a calculated field that's actually going to take the unit price divided by the quantity so I can see the true unit price, right?
Seth, we're all in awe of you. That's why we're quiet.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I think we're all like, OMG. That's what I'm going through right now. I'm like, oh my God. I've been so scared of this for so many years, and you're making it so easy. But
right.
I have to watch it like many times to get to this level.
That's why we record this stuff.
Mariette, I think once upon a time, Seth told us that when you're doing presentations to accountants, it's different than the rest of the world. That when accountants get interested, they get quiet.
It's so true. Like literally, I feel like we can hear like a pin drop. It's like so dead quiet. We're all just like with our mouths open, our eyes wide open.
I was afraid to look at the cameras to see if you were all like yawning and falling asleep.
No, I'm looking at the cameras and everybody can't even get close enough to the screen. Their faces are like.
Well, that's good. That's good. See, well, the other side of it is sometimes we start asking a lot of questions and get really engaged when we're really interested in the topic. I've seen it go that way too. So, by the way, I haven't played around with the calculated fields that much. So I'm trying to go in here and see how we can do it. It looks like it wants to create formulas based on existing fields, not based on what I was hoping to be able to do, which is take the sum of the unit purchase price and divide that by the sum of the quantity. Notice those choices aren't here.
Seth, what you could do is create the calculated fields in the data set itself rather than try to do it in the pivot table.
Right. Yeah, that's certainly one way. And then the other way is right here. I can actually say take that divided by that, and it gives me my result, $1.38 each. So, in fact, that's, you know what it does? Oh, you know what? It doesn't do relative referencing when I copy that down. So I copied it down. All right, so that's a little annoying. So you know what, Dennis? I like your idea better. We would go back into, well, here's the thing. If we go into the data tab, the unit purchase price, I believe, is just that. It's the unit purchase price. So let me see something. So for Alice Mutton, which is the product, let's go find that, right? Because we want to test this out. So let's go to the product, and I'm not going to go scrolling. I'm just going to go in here. Remember, we learned how to use the filters last time, and type Alice and click OK. But no, I don't want the gnocchi. So we're going to uncheck that, and I only want Alice Mutton. So that's $31.20. So the problem is when I do this, it's the sum of the purchase price. So that's not really helping me. Let's get the quantity out of here for a minute. So let's play around and see what else we can do on this field. So instead of the sum, do we want the count? We can actually do the average, and that should get us the actual unit price in this case, I believe, for that product. Let's try it. So the average comes out to 36.47, which is interesting. I want to know, are there different prices? There were different prices. Look at that. So that's actually really cool because some of them were sold at 39, others at 31.20. So actually the average is what I want because this will kind of, it says right here then, average of unit price. So this tells me the average price that each of these products sold for. So, and again, as you just saw right in front of your eyes, literally, a lot of times this is a matter of just playing around and seeing how do I get what I want? Like, don't give up and say, oh, I don't know how to do this. It's so complicated. No, keep trying. You know, bend your brain a little bit and say, let me play with this. Let me see what my options are. Right? The way that I learned how to do all this, I never took a course, never watched a video. I don't drink my own Kool-Aid because I teach stuff hoping that people will learn it from me, but I'm not the sort of person that would normally ever sit and listen to somebody else's video to learn how to do something. I'm more the sort that will go in there and play with it and get into the trenches and figure out how to do it myself. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is I'm very OCD. Two, I learn it better that way. Like if I've had to struggle through it to figure out how to do it, I retain that information. I will never forget, how to do it once I've gone through that process with it. So if I go into the value field settings, there's a lot of stuff you can do to start playing around with what kind of information you can get out of this. And I want to show you another example. But before I kind of shift gears, does anybody else have any questions, comments, thoughts, theories, hypotheses?
Silence once again.
All right.
We're still absorbing.
Fair enough. Like a bunch of little sponges. Let's create a new pivot table. And before
Seth, I just so love it when you excel. You excel at Excel.
I saw your comment in the registration. And I laughed when I saw that, when you said, I love watching Seth excel. I didn't know if you meant like excel at life or actually using Microsoft Excel. Let me also check our live feed here because I've been very inattentive to that. Mike Henninger says, awesome stuff. Thank you, Mike. And Marriott commented on the Facebook feed saying, next week he's showing this to us in Google Sheets. All right, cool. All right, so no questions or anything like that. All right, so back at it. Let's go insert a pivot table. Another one. So let's say I'm going to do something perhaps a little bit complex now. Let me snag it out of the way. Go away. I do not need you.
A little bit complex? So what you just did right now? Easy?
Yeah. That was the 101. We're about to do 102.
Oh, Lord.
No. All right. So we're going to set up my field for a sum. I want to do a number format, comma separator. Again, that's my preference for how I like negative numbers to look. No right or wrong here. All right, so now I've got the basic template in place. So here's what I want to do. I want to see, let's see, I want the product category. So the category name. And then within that, I want the product. And then above that, I want the full name, right? So now I have multi-layers, right? But notice what it does. There's a few things we're going to start changing about some of this information. Notice what it does. It assumes I want everything sort of subtotaled incrementally, right? And in many cases, that is, in fact, exactly what I want. So here it shows me Andrew Fuller, and I can zip Andrew Fuller up in case I don't want to look at him. And maybe I don't want to look at Ann. So I'm clicking on these little minus signs, right, to zip it all up. By the way, up here on where it says row labels, I can right-click. Is it there? Or click in here and expand and collapse. And so I can expand everything, right? Expand entire field. So that gets me back there. I can also collapse everything. So doing that, I quickly get a summary of just by name what their sales were. Let's expand the entire field again. But let's say I don't really need a subtotal at each of these levels. Levels. What's a level? It's like a level, but anyway. I just want to kind of see them side by side. I want them in more of a tabular kind of format, right? So here's what you do. Here where I've got full name under rows, we're going to go to field settings. And now I want you to pay attention. And again, this is a perfect example of something that one day I said, there's got to be a way, there's got to be a better way. When you find yourself asking that question, the answer is usually there is. You just have to learn how to play with it and get what you want out of it. So I said at one time, there's got to be a better way. I don't necessarily want everything subtotaled. I got to have a place where I can go to choose that. And sure enough, in the field settings, once I've got it in the rows, over here I can say, you know what? I don't need a subtotal by name necessarily. So let's just say none, right? Over here under layout and print, let's show items in tabular form. That means we're going to put them side by side rather than in a subtotaled like format. The other thing, if I did want it subtotaled, by the way, it may change. If I go back to automatic subtotals, over here is what I wanted to show you. I'll have to find it. So if I say show items in labels in outline forms, you see here where it says display subtotals at the top of each group, and by default that's checked off. A lot of us are more accustomed to seeing subtotals beneath. So if I uncheck this and click OK, notice what it'll do is Andrew Fuller, notice there's no longer a total here because it puts it now at the bottom. Right? So Andrew Fuller total is down there. Now let's also do that on the category name. And let's also do that on the product. I wish there was a way to save these settings. Unfortunately, there's not. But just that tweak alone might get a report like this in a format that I know for me, I prefer to read it this way. It bugs me because I've been trained to look for totals on the bottom, not on the top. So I don't know whose idea at Microsoft that was to make the default to have the subtotals on top. But now we have the total for each product category. And then I have the total for Andrew Fuller. But now I want to look at it tabular. So instead of looking at the subtotals at all, I'm going to say I want no subtotals for Andrew. Let's say OK. Actually, let's go back to that. And I also want under layout and print, I want to see it in tabular form. So you see what that does already? It puts Andrew in his own column, basically, instead of grouping it and indenting it. We're going to do the same with the category. No subtotal, give it to me in tabular form. Boom. And again, there's no right or wrong way of doing this. This is just, you might look at this and say, yeah, you know what, that's a lot easier for me to read. Now let's really get crazy. And let's say, you know, I don't want the name at the top level. I want to see the category name first. Again, simple tweak, click and drag. Boom. So now, again, it might be valuable to see first the product category, right? And then within that, the sales rep, and then the product. And you know what? Let's say we decide, I don't even care about the name now. I just want to see product categories and sales, and I want to see it in tabular form. So again, once you start playing with this, you start seeing how there's lots of ways to very quickly and easily tweak this data. All right. Let's do another pivot table. Give me my order total. I want to see the countries in the columns. And I want to see the category names. So here's basically sales by category by country. So I can see what product categories are doing well in what parts of the world. And let's say I want to stick the quantity underneath the category name. So now that shows me for each category how many sold in what country. Or I could move it over to the values and say, show me the quantity next to the, so I know I sold 82 beverage products for a total of this in Argentina. So, you know, bigger picture, the point again is I can reorganize it. That's why they call it a pivot table. I can pivot around this data any which way that you can imagine to get incredibly useful information out of it. And it just makes it really easy to do when I'm using a pivot table. And again, I don't know of any reporting module in any software product out there that gives you this kind of freedom and flexibility with respect to how you can organize and reorganize data and report on it and, you know, understand it this well. I mean, you can see how a report like this could be incredibly useful for a sales team at one of your clients, right?
Hey, Seth,
Yes, sir.
do you ever use pivot charts?
No, I haven't. I just haven't had the need. I mean, yeah, we can add those in here. All right, so let's insert a new pivot table. All right, so let's watch Seth learn, because I've never done a pivot chart before, because like I said, I never had the need. So we can do column. Let's click OK. Again, let's get my order total in there. That's neat. Look at that, coming to life already. And let's do my classic. So we're going to do, I want my month in the legend. That's not what I meant to do. I wanted to move the chart over so I could see it more better. We want the year above the month. That's actually really cool, Dennis. I've never played with this before. I learned something new today. What do I want in my rows, which is my axis categories? Let's see, country.
Well, you know, Dennis is our other spreadsheet geek. We gotta get you guys to do a dual show, a duo.
Ooh.
You and Dennis.
And bring Hector too.
Yeah, Dennis is like Mr. Spreadsheet as well, Mr.
Actually,
Pivots and
Actually,
color
I'm
coordination.
more Mr. Access. I used to use this kind of stuff when I was a data analyst.
So this is getting a little condensed now that I've got it sort of by country here. Let's get country out of there. Let's see what else we can do, because there's a lot of different countries in the report apparently. So let's.
Hey, Seth, did you answer the question from Kelly that's in the chat? Just want to make sure you didn't miss it. So would you explain
how the field shifts when using a row, when using as a row field and then as a value? I'm not sure I understand the question. Let's go back to one of these other pivot tables. So you can't, oh, okay. I think she's referring back to when I did this, when I put the quantity in. So what it, when I use the row as a field, when I put the quantity in as the rows, it's going to describe the sales data, the sum of the order total, here as a quantity underneath beverages, right? So here it's almost like the quantity becomes a row delineator, right? When I drag it into the values, now it's going to put the quantity in as part of the actual report data, right? So when I put the quantity in over here, now it's giving me a summary by product category of both the quantity, how many sold, and the order total. So I had 82 products in the beverages category sell for a total of 1,798. In other words, when it's here, I'm using the quantity as part of the data that I'm reporting on. When I put it in the row, it's just another way of describing the sales data that remains in the value quadrant. Does that make sense? Yes. Perfect. All right, so this starts getting very cluttered as I add a lot of information in, and this is why when you're doing this kind of stuff, you want to really be working on a very big screen. I purposely share my smaller screen with you all because when I put it on my big screen and share, it's such a high resolution that it ends up being very small on your screens. What's cool is here you have filters now in the pivot chart, so I could say, you know what, only show me 2006, okay. That gets a little easier to look at. And then you can easily toggle years. 2005, there's a lot more data. And then let's take full name out of there. And then if you ever go here, if you want to just clear all your sort of settings, just click clear. Oh, that actually clears the whole report. Cool, we'll start over. So let's put countries in my axis category there. No, let's put it in here. And this is where I start, and I'll do this a lot. If I'm playing around with pivot tables with actual client data, once I get into creating the basic report that I set out to create, a lot of times I'll then spend time sitting here and saying, what else can I do with this? I'll just play with it, literally, like I'm playing with a toy. I'll say, what else can I get out of this? You know, what else can I do? Let me see what happens if I stick something in the axis categories, you know, with everything else set the way it is, and let me see what that, maybe I'll just get lucky and find that I've got some really useful information. But look, this gives me a nice looking chart showing me sales by country, right? And what if I want let's see what happens if I put the product in my axis category. Again, it's because there's so many products, right? So let's do product category instead, category name. And even that still gets very sort of consolidated. Let's pull country out of it. We'll uncheck that. So now this is nice and easy to read because I've basically got sales by product, right? So pivot charts is just a very easy way to create useful charts out of data. It's easier than actually just selecting the data set and inserting a chart. Where's my charts? Here. So you could just go right into the source data and start creating charts, but I think what we've just seen is that it's much easier to create a chart this way. Because again, you can just play around with what you want in your legend and what you want in your axis categories and what values you're sort of reporting on. Right? And then one last thing I'll show you, going back to, you know, using the tabular thing. So let's insert one more new pivot table, and I'll show you where that can be really useful. Remember from last week that I had broken out our product code and product number and category name. So let's say that I want in my rows, I want my product code, and I want my product number. But here's a case where I definitely don't want it sort of subgrouped like that. Let's put order total in the values. Let's get that done real quick. Again, I wish there was a way to, like, you know, set my default settings for these things, but there just isn't. And now we're going to go to product, field settings. I don't need a subtotal on this, and I want it in tabular form. Okay, I want to do the same with product code. No subtotal. Show it in tabular form. Notice there's two tabs here, so I've been going into both of them here to say no subtotal, and under layout and print to say show items in tabular form. Click OK. You see how quickly now that this starts to make much more sense, right? Because now I've got a nicely laid out table that shows me the product name, the product code, and the product number, and then the total sales for that product, right? Having this in subtotal or subgroupings, it's not a way that I would want to read this, but this makes it really clear. So I can see the product code, and the product number all side by side alongside the total sales for that product. right? Now I can do something with this where, so if I need to report by product code, let's say it's because we're trying to make some changes on the website and the website has the database based on product code or product number, getting a report like this makes it really easy for me to help my client to update, let's say, his SKUs in his Shopify store, right? And that's a specific use case for how this becomes infinitely valuable. So now let's say I want to go add the name in here. So let's put the name above. So now I've got it grouped by sales rep and each product code, and total sales. If I go down here, there's and so on and so forth. So a quick little tweak like that then gives a whole other dimension to this. Initially, I had one straight list of each product, what the code and number were, and what the total sales were. Now I've got it broken out by sales rep. Now, let's say I want to flip this because I want to see within each product how much each sales rep is selling. I can just drag the full name down beneath all of it. So now this is kind of cool because I can see Alice Mutton, here's the code and number, and here's how much each sales rep has sold of that. And then the last thing is I might want to, I don't know what period of time I'm looking at this for. As you know, the data that we're looking at spans a 3-year period. So what I might want to do is take the year, which I had created, and let's drag that into the filters, right? And now that puts this little filter guy here. So I can say, only show me this for 2006. And it shows me 2006. Right? So that's one way to, so I can now, again, analyze the data and say, you know, only show me 2004. Or if I want to select multiple items, I can say, show me 2004 and 2005. Okay. And then I may also want that in the columns. Right? And so notice what that did. By moving the year from the filters to the columns, it actually creates it in the column format. And notice the filter is here. It actually kept my filter intact. So it's only showing me 2004 and 2005. And if I want, I can just clear this out. And now I have all 3 years broken out for each product code and number, and each sales rep. So again, from what we looked at earlier, I've completely pivoted around. Before, everything we looked at was really by sales rep, and within that by product. Now I flipped the script, and this can be incredibly useful. You know, I can look at Ann and say, Ann, why aren't you selling Alice Mutton? Everybody else is selling Alice Mutton. Why can't you be more like your brothers and sisters? That was a joke. See how many
Alice
people
Mutton's for sale?
I don't know what Alice Mutton is, but apparently it's a product of some sort.
Sounded like a person.
I know. Well, it could be like Aunt Jemima, right? It could be like syrup or something.
Right.
I don't know. Right? Speaking of syrup, we have aniseed syrup. And I think this data came from a sample that was from, I think, another country, not ours. But anyway, let me check the Facebook feed real quick, see what people are saying.
Not much new.
Not much.
People
Nope.
that are watching you.
Nobody
I was
cares.
playing a little bit, putting in wows and putting in likes and putting in hearts.
Oh, thank you. Oh, and Elizabeth says mutton is baby lamb.
Yeah, but what is Alice Mutton?
Maybe it's a certain brand of baby lamb.
Oh, I don't want to hurt Alice.
Well, I don't think Alice is a person. I think that like there's Alice Springs, I think, is a city in Australia or something. So maybe it's like a baby lamb that comes from Australia. I don't know. I totally just made that up. Anyway, that's all, folks. So next week we're going to actually take the original raw data set, drop it into Google Sheets, and see how much of this we can do in Google Sheets, if not all of it.
Awesome.
Okay? And don't forget, 97 and up. We do this stuff twice a week on top of Fridays. And, well, it's not always Excel, but the point is you can come in there and ask about anything you want, and we can do anything you want. And we can teach you whatever you need to know specifically for your live clients. And we can help you get through it and get to it. So check it out. We'll put this up tomorrow. I'll put up the updated template as a new download when I put the video up from today. And don't forget to register. I'll put the live registration up for next Friday as well, so we can look at all this in Google Sheets. Anybody, any questions, concerns, comments, feedback before we go?
We're still just blown away.
Well, then don't forget to join Gina in her hangout today. And
Ada Barlett today, Google Forms.
Google Forms, beautiful. I love that. Google Forms is really cool. If you haven't played around with that, there's a lot you can do with it, and they've made a lot of changes to it over the years. It's gotten really cool in terms of what you can do with it.
We're going to have lots of fun, panelist participation, so join us.
Okay, we will see you all later on today.
Bye-bye.
Bye.